Okay, I'm going to kick it off. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad that you are here with us, and just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, we are pleased to deliver a program featuring two longtime colleagues and close friends, both of whom have a lot to say, and I promise you will leave here today a lot smarter and more inspired than when you arrived. More on that in a moment. Before we get started, let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people in the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Most of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And please ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address speakers and attendees. I want to thank our sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this free. Thank you to First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and Cushmaster's brand of CBD products. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome Matt Signore. Matt was Chief Operating Officer of Warner Music Nashville from 2017 to 2020. During his tenure, the label had a creative and financial resurgence. Matt previously served 5 years as president of WIA Corporation, which provides sales, analysis, account management, and supply chain management for the worldwide organization. Prior to this role, Matt held senior positions at Island Records and Island Def Jam. Currently, he is co-founder of Sempre Così, a focused mentoring service for artists, executives, and managers in the entertainment industry. Matt provides professional, confidential, and honest solutions to Sempre Così clients. Matt, you're going to have to repronounce that for us later in the program. I'm sorry I butchered it.
No worries.
Matt is the president of the board of Porter's Call, a nonprofit that provides free counseling services to artists and their families. He's also a graduate and board member of the esteemed Leadership Music Program. Welcome, Matt. So glad you're back in Nashville.
Thanks, Tom.
And joining Matt as today's special guest is Elsa Vivero. Elsa is General Manager and Executive Vice President of Global Commercial Services at WIA, the Global Artist and Label Services Division of Warner Music Group. She leads a diverse international team and works closely with digital partners to enhance the global presence of WMG artists and labels, along with overseeing the physical sales and label marketing services managed by WIA. She's previously held positions in sales and marketing at both WIA and associated labels, including Warner Music Latina and Maverick. In 2019, she was named one of Billboard Digital Power Players and was recognized on Billboard's Women in Music Executives list in 2020. She was born in Cuba and resides in New York City. Please welcome these two rock stars to the smartest people in the room. Please take it away, Matt.
All right, thanks, Tom. Oh, there we go. Things have changed on my screen, which is good. Elsa called me a couple of months ago and said that Tom had given her or wanted her to participate in this program, and that she had the opportunity to choose the person that she wanted to host the event, and her asking me to do it was, a great honor. I feel blessed to have worked with Elsa, to know Elsa. I mean, she's a dear friend, and I'll try to avoid, as many inside jokes as I can, but there are some WIA folks that know that I attempted to do this probably about 10 years ago and interview Elsa at the end of the day over a couple of drinks in my office, and I only made it to like the mid 90s. So we're going to try to get to 2021 today. Elsa's career has been spanned over 3 decades, and I think as someone who has done it as well, I'm sure some folks on the call have as well. She has experienced so many things through the changes in her career and the challenges that she's been up against. And I think we're going to try to today, I want to ask Elsa questions to share her experiences from a couple of standpoints. Number one, just what happened, because even just what happened to her and her career is instructive. Also the context around it, because the industry has changed so much, and we talked about this idea of pivotal moments in her career, and try to highlight those so she can explain what was going on, both from her perspective, from the industry perspective, and from a human perspective, like how you go through those things, and how you, and the word survival came up a lot, and we talked about how those periods of time, a lot of times it was about survival. So I want to get started, and Elsa, please get, I tried to figure out when you started, and then you told me a story about something you did before you started your first entree into the music business, and I'll let you go into when you really started, and got your first legitimate job. So go ahead.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. And I wouldn't have pictured anyone else doing this. So thank you for doing this. And thank you, Tom, for having us here today. I joined WIA in 1988, and it was November 10th. I remember the date precisely. Let's just say I was old enough to drive, so I could drive myself to the office, but I wasn't old enough to drink. So somewhere in between those ages is where I was. And it was the 80s in Miami. So there was a lot going on in terms of it being a popular city, let's say, but not necessarily a huge market. But I answered the phone. I helped the sales staff. There might even be some people on this call today that were there in that office at the time. I often had to console radio promo people when they didn't get the ad they were trying to get, or they didn't get a call back from the program director. But I learned a great deal. I mean, it was a front row seat. WIA and its place as a leader in distribution and everything that was going on in the industry at the time. There was a constant flow of artist visits, shows, scandals in a city that was developing rapidly as a major music market, but still felt like a small town. So that was the beginning. And I often say that I still use things I learned in those first 5 years at Warner Music.
Well, you did tell me about an earlier job, but I thought you might mention that your first entree into music was a little different, where that's what I was looking for as well. But if you want to share that or not, but it's probably statute of limitations allows. But
yeah, I knew I wanted to work in the record business, so I went to try to work at a record store, and I was probably slightly under the age that I needed to be to work there. This is a recurring theme. We'll have this as a recurring theme, the age issue. But yes, I must have fudged a little bit how old I was so I could work at 2 record stores actually before I got to work at WIA, and wouldn't have gotten the job at WIA if I hadn't met people that were coming into our stores, because that was what was going on at the time. We had all the major music companies in town, and all working closely and coming into retail stores day in, day out. So it was a big part of the community, and it was a big part of how people connected.
So knowing Elsa's story a little bit, right? Those first really taking her career in like 3 chunks, like the first 10 years. And originally, again, we learned stuff about each other, even though we've known each other for over 15 years. I kind of wrongly assumed Elsa was in Miami already working in Latin music. So Latin music is part of your experience. But those first 10 years kind of took you to your first kind of pivotal moment that we talked about, having kind of grown up in the business at that point. So can you talk about kind of that first like real change, in I think we said 1998 or so.
Yeah, absolutely. In the early 90s, I moved to LA. I went to work for Warner Music Latina, which at the time was known as WIA Latina. And it was a great experience. It was my first label job. I was assistant to the president for 1 year. Then I moved into sales. I was working closely with WIA, which was an obvious role for me, and jumped right into working in sales and working with the major accounts. And it was special in a lot of ways. It was the beginning of my association with Latin music, which to this day holds a special place for me. But it was really the first place where I experienced working with artists and learning how building relationships when your projects and priorities are small compared to others really takes a lot of extra work. And so in the early part of 1998, I had an opportunity present itself, and it was going to mean leaving Warner Music after 10 years. And the opportunity was to move to New York and work for the entity then known as PGD, Polygram Group Distribution. And I had been at Warner for 10 years. The role was in New York. It was appealing in a lot of ways. I had grown up in New York City, but I'd never lived here as an adult. And so I felt like it was time to prove myself in a different way. And I remember going to WEA home office and sitting at the time with an older gentleman who basically had the job that I have today. And he offered to create a role, and if I would stay at Warner Music. And I said, no, I need to do this. I know that I'll be back. I'll be better for it. And I went, and then began a turn of events that I couldn't have predicted, which was that I started at Polygram on May 4th of 1998. And Matt, you and I didn't know each other at the time, but we've shared stories about that time later. Right. Exactly 1 week later, the Seagram's Universal acquisition was announced. And by December of that year, PGD ceased to exist as a company. So this was looking like a big mistake for me, given that I picked up and moved across the country, and within less than a year, 9 months, the company was going to be eliminated altogether as a result of the merger. But worked through that transition, and it looked like I was going to join the Universal system and in fact go right back to LA. But in the spring of '99, I was told that my role was going to someone else and there wasn't a role for me. And I decided that I needed to hang on to my apartment in New York and get back there no matter what.
And I think that, when we realized, I didn't know all the, Elsa found out as we tried to talk about this, like thinking things on a timeline. There's a lot of, and we're going to get to I think the best and most important part of the story about how Elsa has led the way in the world of streaming in the last 10 years. But I do think the context of that moment for people who experienced it, it changed the business, it changed the lives of people and some of the folks on this call, right? And I think want to make sure as we talk through this, like, we keep in mind the passion for music that drove you through that, right? Because I think that there were a lot of reasons to get off that boat, when things changed like that and the experiences you had. So, yeah, that was a crazy time that I'm just happy that you continued and got to the other side of it, right? So, any other thoughts about that time on a personal level around that experience?
I mean, it was scary. It was jarring, it was an enormous disappointment at the time. And you're absolutely right. So many people were affected by that. And then in subsequent years, other difficulties that the industry was going through. But, to this day, you meet people who went through that experience and were there during that time on whatever side of it they were. But a lot of people went through that experience. But ultimately, if I hadn't taken that leap, although it didn't pan out quite as I expected, there were several people that I wouldn't have met. And they went on to be instrumental not too many years later, just a few years later. And so had I not done that, I know that I wouldn't have met them, wouldn't have necessarily had the same relationship with them. And I was able to come out of it. I took some time off. I started to reconnect with people in Warner. I did some consulting work with a couple of small labels. And then I had the opportunity to join Maverick. They were opening a new Latin division, which took me back to Miami. So by now I was doing a triangle around the country. I had a fantastic experience there. And I was back in the Warner system. And that then paved the way in many respects, along with the relationships from the people that I'd met at Polygram, to come back to WEA in what I often say, I only just came back to WEA in 2003 because it doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but that's when I came back, and it does feel like it was just yesterday.
Yeah, and so, 2003 literally itself, right, was I think the year of the first download, right? So it certainly marked another moment in your career in the history of the business where that changed, to the world that we live in today, or different versions of the digital world that we live in today. And again, a time where the industry struggled, a time where we met in 2005. I got to WEA in 2005, and we started working together in the midst of the physical decline and the changes that meant for physical distribution in the music business in general. So I want you to pick the next moment at around that time that demonstrates that in terms of the conversation, because I definitely already know the question I want to ask you about it. So I know, but
Okay.
so go for it.
Well, first and foremost, end of 2002, beginning of 2003, Jim Caparo and John Esposito, Espo, took charge of WIA. And so they were moving the headquarters to New York. They needed a head of Latin sales. So I signed up for that quickly. The 2000s, as you noted, were very challenging years. There was a plus side, which is what we met in 2005. But by 2005, as you said, it was obvious that the physical sales structure that we had that was very specialized, couldn't sustain. And at that point, it was hard for a lot of people, and we knew that we needed to adjust. And I remember a very cold morning in December of 2005, when I had to meet with Espo to see what was going to happen next for me. And there was a New York City transit strike. So I think I started trying to get to the office at around 7 a.m. for a 10 a.m. meeting. He was late. But at that point, he asked me to take on managing 2 additional teams. They were not areas that I knew much about, but I knew that he trusted me, that the company trusted me, and that somehow I could apply the skills that I had to what I was being asked to do. And that's been really my approach all along, to figure out how I could convert my skills and say yes to everything, because that's really what we did for the remainder of that decade as we tried a lot of new things.
Yeah, and I think I had was really recent to the company at that point, at that moment when that change happened, and it led to further changes of the shrinking of the employee base dedicated to physical, and what that meant around restructurings, and what that meant around decisions that had to be made. That it was a blessing for both of us that at that moment Warner decided that we would be allowed to help design Warner's point of view around digital distribution, which probably kept us both employed. But what that meant in those decision-making processes, like you just described, and throughout, frankly, the rest of the decade, I know we found ourselves at WIA saying, okay, something's changing, and we have this amazing, talented executive in Elsa who will say yes, and we'll figure it out, right? But I think, while being valued at that point, was there any disappointments during that period of time around opportunities you thought you could have had? Or, I mean, it was invisible to us, invisible to me at that time, because that you never manifested anything other than, got it, yes, I'm going to do this and I'm going to kill it, right? But I mean, talk about that a little bit if you can. I mean, so.
I think, the disappointment was probably in the difficult conversations that we had to have with people, and the people that we saw leave the business. That was the hardest thing to do, and we had to do it several times. And so that was really the most disappointing thing for me. I felt like, I'm here. I need to work harder and be more committed, because the group of people that get to do this is shrinking at the time. And so really taking that as a responsibility. And sure, the number of things that I was asked to work on, and we tried a lot of things that were experimental, most of which didn't really work. But there was certainly an appetite for trying to figure out what was going to happen next. And notably, I wasn't involved on iTunes. I didn't work on iTunes. I was watching closely what was happening there and working closely with those teams. But I think you said it earlier, it was very much a question of survival, right? And convert your skills, adapt your skills. Were there opportunities that maybe I didn't hear about or didn't know about? Maybe, possibly,
Right.
But I was just too focused on just trying to keep us moving into whatever the next thing was going to be.
Yeah. And part of it, and I hope it's okay to ask this, we talked about this a little bit, right? I think it's important, for Elsa, as a successful woman in the music business for 30 years, which in 2021, I have male counterparts who lost jobs for different reasons or whatever, the business changed. But, you as a woman now inspiring other women who, I'm going to give her a shout out. Even she texted me, Victoria Chadoff, who I work with at Warner Nashville, making fun of me right now as a future woman executive in the music business who could learn from you and the things that you went through. So I look back on that time and hope that we as a company, always were part of making your career possible or opportunities possible for you. But I know you had to run into things that had to be challenging for you. So if you could share that a little bit, that could help folks on the phone who definitely want to learn about that road for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I only have my own point of view, right? I can only have the perspective of what I am. And I am a Hispanic woman who was an immigrant who came to this country as a baby and saw my parents work very hard because they had made the choice to come here. And that certainly informed my work ethic and how I approached my life. Now, I entered a male-dominated industry at a very, very young age, at a time when, quite frankly, behaviors that are not tolerated today were normal and accepted, and you had to work through that. I think a lot about the idea of bias or the idea of missed opportunities. And is it very likely that there were opportunities that I wasn't considered for, or that I didn't even know about because they got decided on a golf course or somewhere else? I know that, of course. But there's also the internal doubt or the tendency that we might have to not put ourselves forward, to not showcase your own work. And I certainly had to work on that. And I had to make sure that if there was any bias present, that I wasn't aiding and abetting that bias by further limiting myself or thinking that my opportunities were limited. So that's something that, you know, I still work on today, and it's something that I think many women think about, but I think it's something that everyone thinks about. How do you find that balance between promoting and showcasing yourself and then really focusing on the work and being true to the work at the same time and being humble at the same time?
Yeah, well, thank you for doing that, because it's, you know, obviously not the easiest thing to talk about. So I appreciate you sharing that. And, you know, so because I think that, you know, my perspective on it, which we shared, was this idea that, you know, I hoped you would feel that way today, right? That's how you saw it, and things, if there were things that happened, they hopefully didn't happen, not just with transparency. So because that kind of puts us, you know, in about the halfway point in the mid 2000s, right? So unfortunately, the other one of the other things that happened around that time, which I think is interesting around the other like industry milestones that were happening along the timeline, right? We talked about the 1998 and the merger, and that was a big moment in the industry. And 2003 was the introduction of the download and the physical decline. The other thing that was happening with Warner, as it turned out, and a couple of times through this process, was the fact that it became a public company in 2005, right? So I think in addition to the marketplace changing, you got to experience the only publicly traded music company, right? And an executive in that company. Do you have any memory of that time about things changing? Because you had also gone through Time Warner, Warner Communications, like you've been through many iterations of corporate change. I'm wondering if in that next moment of, because, you know, to fast forward, you were there when Warner went public in 2005, went private in 2011, and went public in 2020, right? So if you any perspective on that as an executive through that period of time, I'd be curious how you felt about that.
I think, as you noted, you know, I had been through various versions. I remember when we had to change the letterhead, when we still had letterhead, from, you know, Warner Communications to Time Warner, and then the various permutations of that. I think all it did was make us be more aware, you know, aware that what we were doing was having now greater resonance in the industry at large, in the business world at large, and understanding that what we did and the choices that we made mattered. I certainly feel like we felt heard, and there was a lot of opportunity for us to try new things and to experiment, and we had trust, you know, from our organization. So certainly felt positive throughout all of that, but it did require being ready for what was the next big change, or what are the next set of guidelines that we need to follow, or making sure that we're all really conscious of the impact of what we do and what we say. And thankfully, all of those have worked out positively. So.
That's cool. So, you know, we made our way through that process through, you know, every year forecasting, well, how much are we going to decline this year, right? So we lived through that through the end of that decade, and then another new thing came along that we needed to figure out. And again, thankfully, that WIA was part of that decision-making process and said, well, there's this new Spotify thing, like, what does this streaming thing mean to us? And oh, okay, we're gonna be given as a group the challenge to manage it. Well, Elsa could probably figure that out. So if you could talk about kind of when this chapter of, you think about that period of time where you were given all the new things, and including, we made some toys in China, right?
A lot of different things. We made some books, we made some toys.
Yeah. And then, so when streaming came along, did it seem as strange as like the freaky creatures characters we were going to make, or what was your thought process? Because you were there at the onset, so I'm curious, like, what was your first impression of the next new thing?
Didn't seem quite as strange as the creatures, but yeah, in that late 2011, early 2012 period, I would say I often think about that as being another really pivotal moment for me, right? And at that point, I said yes one more time when my good friend, and may even be on here today, and worth noting, Polygram colleague Larry Matera, asked me to be part of the global accounts team that we were building. That in and of itself was a new concept, how we manage global partnerships and how we did that in the digital space. And he asked me to help manage Spotify on a global basis, to build out our first dedicated streaming account management team, and to figure out this new idea of streaming. And it was not yet revenue meaningful by any means. So we had to figure it out early on. And I was happy to do that and spent the next decade really doing just that. And gradually leading into additional responsibilities. But that was an extremely important moment because I was excited to be able to be part of that and be part of that group who were trying to answer some of these unanswerable questions of the time. How do we now define, what does it mean to listen to a song or own a song or consume a song, or all of those things that were changing, definitions were changing day by day. So I was thrilled to be able to be a part of that from the beginning.
Yeah, we talked then, and we've talked as we prepared for this, right? The language of the business that changed over time. And, you just hit a couple of them, and one of the things that we talked about back then, and we kind of reminisced about as part of this process, right? When you thought about, are people going to pay for a subscription for music, right? What does that mean? Like, how is that going to work? And you described it to me once as if music were like a utility, right? When you pay your electric bill, your gas bill. So I remember you having that vision in a lot of ways for, if it was going to work, it was going to have to feel like that. I don't know if you have any more thoughts about that, because I do want to talk more about terminology, because I think, that's an important part of this narrative as the business changed, right? Because we talked, and I'll lead it by saying that we talked about the language about music changing, and in a lot of ways was almost felt like an attempt to separate the business from the music. So I want you to comment on that, Bug.
Well, I think first, the idea of music as a utility, it might sound cold, right? But it really was thinking about, in a positive way, the idea that consumers would adopt and be comfortable with and engage in a behavior of paying every month to have access to music and want that to be part of what they felt were essential services in their life, in their home, along with electricity and other things. So I think the idea that it would be adopted in that way was really where the thinking was around that. And yes, the idea that now people can listen and consume in so many ways, and constantly evolving how we tackle that, and how we make sure that we're doing everything possible to get the music to the fans. Because you said something earlier about WIA and distribution entities overall being part of building out what digital accounts or digital commercial would look like in the future. It wasn't that big of a leap, right? Yes, we had to convert our skills from traditional sales, but we had the foundation to build on, which was the music and the songs and getting those out to fans. So while it might have seemed like we were placing that responsibility and a part of the business that wasn't equipped for it, I think we proved ourselves able in that, and made sure that we kept changing the terminology and changing the approach to reflect what was going on with consumers, because that's really what needed to lead the conversation.
Yeah, and I think I felt like the language created the separation. As I said, as someone who was always, certainly in the last, even prior to the streaming part of your life, that there were these things that were adjacent to music. And talk about, your connection to music or your passion for it, I think, because it's easy in those settings, because you're a lot of times through those years, you're around people who beyond not having appreciation for music, right? So if you can talk about how you stayed connected to it when a lot of the jobs you had were separating you from it in a lot of ways.
Well, I think, first, I knew that I wanted to work in the business. I knew that I had a passion for music and artists and live music, and started going to concerts as soon as I could be allowed to go to concerts, and started working in a record store as soon as I could, because I knew I wanted to be around it. And you're right. I think that we have to sometimes remind ourselves of that if we get caught up in other aspects of the business, and especially start thinking about just the technology or just the financials or anything else that we might be thinking about, and bringing it back to that. That's why I'm grateful that I had time working on the label side and working with artists, because I have those memories and I have that perspective. And when I work with my label colleagues now, I understand where they're coming from, and they've taught me a lot in the intervening years about how they work with artists today, and that's constantly changing as well. I certainly, for those who know me, know that I have several artists that I love and adore and will travel to see. And certainly one of my crowning achievements, in my opinion, was that I got to work for Maverick, because I love Madonna and think she's an incredible icon and artist. So that was a plus. I think Matt even has a story about my love for Bon Jovi and what.
I'm like, I can tell that story.
You
Fantastic.
forgot that story. I think
I was waiting on that one. So that literally the first time I heard Elsa's name, probably like 2003, maybe.
Yeah, had to be 3. Mm-hmm.
Not working together. I was working at Island Def Jam, and Espo called me and said, in its glowing description of this woman who worked with him named Elsa Vivero, and espoused her love for Bon Jovi, and I think John in particular, just to say it. And Bon Jovi was performing, summer concert series at the Today Show, which was right across from the WIA building. And he asked if there was any way that, being at the label that Bon Jovi was on, could I help this person secure some sort of access? So someone I didn't know, I got somebody named Elsa Vivero on the list in a laminate or something to go, probably create a security risk for Bon Jovi. But that was my first experience knowing Elsa, and then come to work at the company 2 years later. And literally, like, every conversation prior to COVID, I guess, if you're looking at Elsa now on the screen, where those books are over her left shoulder, there was some ridiculous picture of John Bon Jovi flexing, or some album cover. So it was really, there were times it was hard to take Elsa seriously based on that, but I got over it after the first, 10 years or so. But, yeah.
Fair. Yes. When we did finally meet in person, you said you were not what I was picturing as the person who really wanted to go see Bon Jovi at the Today Show. Yes,
I left that part out. Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. I said it tactfully. Don't worry. But yes, that is a love that continues. I will say, and I will continue to be going to see them whenever I can. And the other corner of the office, when we're in the office, and I think there's a record behind me too, but is my undying love for Bob Dylan, and that's, that carries through day in, day out. And of course, who doesn't love Bob Dylan? So, but those are just a few examples. I I love the artists that I had a chance to work with. I love the artists that I've had a chance to meet, the artists that I haven't met, you know, and we talk about music all day long. We talk about releases, you know, we're representing those artists and their art when we're out talking about it, even if we're doing it around the commercial aspects of it. And we don't take that lightly, right? We're talking about what they created and what they worked hard to create. So that definitely carries through all the time.
That's cool. So, you know, we talked about that moment when you started engaging with the world of streaming, and then we can leave out a few years of many meetings where folks said, quote, how do we stop this streaming thing? It's going to kill our business. We did a few of those analyses together. But then as streaming matured and evolved and obviously fundamentally changed the trajectory of the business, and you continued through that process, any other, you know, highlights you described kind of through both the start and the turn, right? The idea that there you were again, working on a new thing that not only people weren't sure was going to work, actually thought it was going to damage other parts of our business, and then sticking through to now where you're managing it, you know, in its, you know, continued explosion.
We had to tread lightly, I guess, in some respects, because there were concerns, but at the same time, we were learning along the way. We were picking up incredible knowledge around how people were listening to music, how the services were evolving, how the user experience was evolving, what was happening across the services. And a lot of them came and went, unfortunately, during that time, or combined forces. And we continued to work through all of that and make a lot of friends and people that are, you know, still working along the way. And so when it turned and when it was obvious that when it became obvious finally that streaming was here to stay and became the biggest part of our business, and then that gave me an incredible foundation because I'd been working in it for so long. It made it much easier, and I built a team, and I have an amazing team of talented experts, and I was able to take on more responsibility and stay focused on digital for quite a few years. But really, this year came full circle for me because I got to join up the talents of the physical team and the digital team into one group, which it had really never been quite that way. And that's been incredibly gratifying because I got to bring all of those experiences together with an amazing group of individuals.
That's amazing. And now, I guess, you know, as you know, to kind of take it from today forward, right? And your new, you know, promotion to general manager and your partnership with Maria Weaver, the new head of WIA, and the new, again, in addition to now physical and digital now become the stable old stuff, right? Streaming is the old stuff now, and now you're working in another world of WIA becoming, addressing other ways to continue to find new ways to, again, pick a new word, consume music, engage audiences, whatever. Is it, you want to talk a little bit about more about your current day in terms of both managing the physical digital team, but also kind of the new environment that you're in now in Warner and WIA?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that I get to stay as connected to the music as I do, right? Because managing that is, as you noted, the traditional business, if you will, the recorded music side of things. But there are so many other ways that we're providing services and expertise and really proactive measures to help develop artists, audiences, other types of commerce, the way that products are sold on their behalf. We have an entire media arm that's creating content and has standalone properties and brands that are globally known. So how all of those pieces now intersect, how do we support one another, has really been the focus for the last few months and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. But I'm very happy that I get to stay in the realm of getting music out to fans, but now with all of these other businesses and all of these other experts surrounding, you know, what that artist experience can be beyond the music, and to complement what's happening on the music side, and looking forward to doing more of that in the coming years. And as you said, the role of the distribution company, which we don't even call a distribution company anymore, continues to change. And I've felt very fortunate to be part of that throughout all these many iterations of it along the way.
That's cool. So before I don't know if we're going to do questions or what, but I want to ask you one more thing just around how do you engage with your team and the company around something like this, where you're able to give to that team your experiences and grow people. And like I said, you now responsible for a bigger group of team, and that's bigger group of people over time. Just talk about how you're able, to now continue to be a leader, right? Continue to be a leader for your team, the company, and how you do that these days.
Absolutely. Well, I'd say first of all that this conversation, right, and telling my story is often how I do it, because it's the simplest way to say things can go wrong, but then they can go right. And you never know which person that you might have met very briefly can play a huge role in the future. Relationships matter. Finding champions matters, and being focused on the work, but at the same time, opening yourself up to those opportunities and to those people. So oftentimes just telling my story is a way that I can engage or give people some guidance without being prescriptive, but just by example or by experience, and knowing that sometimes the left turns or the odd detours can result in something great. It's something that I'm very conscious of across both the group of people that I work with directly, but also individuals that I don't work with, that I talk to, and we do, whether it's things like this or people who come to me directly. I'm always happy to tell my story, and if others can learn from my mistakes, then even better. I'm happy for that to be the case. It's certainly been more challenging in the past year and a half, but doing it this way and doing it in person and doing some combination of the two in the future is absolutely how we'll have to continue to do this. And I really do always learn something as well when I have these conversations and talk to people about their experiences. That's really the way that I like to engage. And I want to turn it around on you, Matt, a little bit.
I want to before you do that, I want to do one more thing, because
Okay.
because I didn't know how to form this into a question, so I'm going to answer my own question, right? So
Okay.
we talked about moments throughout this process for you, right? And I want to share one that we talked about, right? And I hope that on your team now that you have someone and those of us who had you as this person for us, whether it was me or Espo or Larry, that there were moments where what a blessing you were, right? So I'll do this in a nondescript way because it doesn't really matter, but we were in a situation where there was a discussion around whether one organization, we or another, was going to manage something. And Elsa and I had to present to the highest level of the company around why that it should be should be us, right? And in a very contentious setting, and some of you could guess who the players were. Someone said, look, I'm done talking about it. I'm done talking about it. Just tell me, who am I going to fire when this doesn't work, right? And I raised my hand because I knew Elsa was going to do it. So, so in that moment of that confidence I had to go, I put my job on the line, knowing that Elsa would execute, right? So for me, she's been a blessing. I didn't know how to frame that into a question. You really can't answer that question, so I just wanted to say that about you. So that's my answer to my own question. So that was it. I want to make sure I stated that because I think it's a perfect encapsulation of your abilities as an executive. So.
Well, thank you for that, Matt. And I remember that moment clearly. And I remember
I didn't get fired.
You didn't get fired, which was good. Yeah, neither did I, which was also good. And ultimately, I was grateful for you trusting me in that moment, but then also realized what we had just signed up for. So it's all right. We did okay. But thank you for sharing that story because I do remember it fondly / scary, but it worked out okay.
It did.
But I think it's a great example of you as, and I have, many people who have been supportive of me throughout my career, and that's why I talk about, talking about these things and being open about these things where they can help other people. You were an incredible champion for me at several moments along the way. And one of the things that I always remember was the importance that you have always placed on making time to do exactly this, to help people in their development, to listen to them, to give them some guidance. You always used to talk about this avuncular conversations that you were having. And I know that despite not being inside the company anymore and you're doing new things, I think it's worth people hearing about how you approach that, and how you continue to share your experience and share your guidance, because I know so many people come to you for guidance, whether officially or unofficially, all the time.
No. Well, thank you. Well, first of all, where I'm sitting is what's called the carriage house. It's the back section of the offices of Porter's Call in Nashville. And Tom mentioned it in the intro. I'm the president of the board now of an organization called Porter's Call, which provides mental health services to artists in Nashville predominantly for free. And the first thing I wanted to do was, give back to artists, and they're actually letting me help in some ways. I'm actually mentoring a few artists here voluntarily. But what I'd say about gravitating towards Porter's Call is I grew up working for Leo Cohen, and oddly enough, Elsa had the blessing of Leo called me a few minutes before our call to congratulate me about becoming a grandfather, and my son gets to work with him, right? So it's kind of an amazing circle. But one thing he said every day, or you had to know, is that artists make payday possible. And everybody on this call who makes a living in the music business gets paid because artists succeed, fail, get addicted, become depressed, so they go through the cycle of being an artist. And Porter's Call, helping artists, was a way that I felt like I needed to do something that was so direct and pay back. So Porter's Call, look it up, go to the website. It's a fantastic organization. Find out more about it. I'm really passionate about it. And Al Andrews is the founder. I've become a partner to him, where he can go do the good work and I can help him run the business a little bit, so it's been a great experience for me to be a partner to him. And that's really the primary thing I'm doing. The mentoring service I'm starting is called Sempre Così, which is Italian for "it should always be like this." And I'm hoping to find ways to continue to do that on a professional level. But luckily, just being selective, like as Elsa said, most people, my wife said to me, "You'll never make a business out of this because you're never going to charge anybody." But there are certain situations where companies come and need help, and I'm happy to get paid. So, but for the most part, it's another vehicle for me to, stay connected. A lot of us are on this call who've been in and out of the business. It's probably predominantly a way to stay connected to the amazing people that I got to know in this business for 30 plus years. So selfishly, that's probably why I'm doing it more than anything else. But that's what I'm up to these days.
Well, they're lucky to have you.
Tom, I think unless Elsa has anything else, I think we're good. Is there anything else you would like us to do, or want us to do? Or are we good? Or
That was fabulous, guys. I really appreciate the stories and the wisdom. I guess a combined 60 years of working together should yield some of those great nuggets. So thank you for sharing all that. Elsa, there was one question from the audience. A good friend of mine, Dick Wingate, was questioning whether or not you are involved in spatial audio initiatives at Warner Music Group. Is that anything in your remit?
It is, and I was fortunate enough to work on the earliest, I think, one of the earliest high-res deals, and I never left the space. So absolutely working on spatial audio, and happy to talk to you about that, Dick. So good to hear from you.
Great. That's a perfect example of why we do these programs right there, trying to connect business opportunities for our audience and for our speakers. So thank you for that, Elsa.
Absolutely.
Folks, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this today. Matt, it's great to have you back in Nashville. I only wish it was on a more permanent basis than temporary. Elsa, you've got a lot of new friends in Nashville. The next time you're down here, I owe you a nice meal, so please take me up on that. And lastly, to the audience, thank you for tuning in and asking your questions. I want to encourage everyone to be nice to each other and get a shot ASAP, please. With that, we shall sign off and we will see you soon. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.